Okay, so here we are in Lightroom. Now let's talk about how to edit your photographs. So we're in the library module. I'm here with inside my catalog where it says all photographs, but I go through and I kind of sort things and I put yellow labels on things that are kind of interesting. Maybe I put red labels on things that I think are interesting. So like if we go here into my contenders, and then you can see, boom, here's a whole bunch of different things in here with both yellow and red labels on them. What I want to do is I want to find something. Let's find something that I haven't edited. Here's my dog. I haven't shown you my dog yet. This is Kit Kat. Welcome to Kit Kat. My son had naming rights. He was about 12 at the time. Let's see. Things that you need to know. I guess I already pointed out the metadata panel. I think I already pointed out. I say I think, by the way, because sometimes I record these screencasts and then something goes wrong and I have to delete it and start over. In case I didn't mention it, I do just want to point out that you can have the same photograph. So here in my library, I'm going to show you in all photographs here. Here in my library, I've got this photo here. I'm going to add it, or it's already in my contenders. Here, I'll do a different one. Let's just say I want this photo to be in my contenders collection. You saw the number go up. But I also want to point out that I can put the same photo in my onions collection, which that's a stupid name. I didn't think this through. But the idea is that a collection isn't a real thing. I mean, it's just, you can have as many different collections as you might like. And when you put a photo into a collection, that same photograph appears in both collections. It's just one photo. It's just one file that is being referenced in multiple collections. So if you make changes to that photograph, those changes appear in both collections, in all the collections, okay? When you make changes to a photo, you are changing the whole photograph. Okay, so here, I'm going to go into contenders just so you can kind of see the workflow. So I go through, I sort through my pictures, I get horribly depressed, I label things that might be of interest, I move them into another collection here to help me sort. I do want to point out that you can sort through the folders as well. Again, I don't know if I already did this in the other screencast. I did it at one point, but that might be the one that I had to throw out. But this is kind of like the way that you might navigate through Adobe Bridge, is to choose to do it through the folders. I'm not going to do it that way. Okay, so to actually edit your photographs, okay? Now, instead of the library module, to change your photo, you move to the develop module, okay? So when you go to the develop module, then everything over here on the right changes. Also, I should point out that this little film strip down at the bottom, you can change the size of this film strip, okay? So if you want it larger or smaller or whatever. That way, you can still see the other photos that are here, and you can keep sort of referencing them and changing them around. For me, this is the one. I think that one has such a weird little vulnerability to it that this is the photo I'm going to work with. Now, in terms of how to actually change your pictures. Now, when I teach you in the Digital Photo 1 how to edit things, I talk about adjusting the brightness first, then the contrast, then the color balance, then the saturation of individual colors, okay? Just do all the same things, but here we're going to change the sequence a little bit, just because Lightroom is kind of built to have you just work from the top down, Okay, so the first thing here in Lightroom is actually the color balance. Now, it doesn't say color balance. It says temp and tint. But what is temperature? Temperature is blue. You're adjusting the balance of blue in your picture, okay? So I want you to see blue, I want you to see yellow. I also want you to see if I double click on that, it goes right back to the default from where it started, okay? So to change the temperature is to change the blue and possibly, more often than not, maybe sliding it over toward the yellow. Always when you're adjusting color balance, you are looking at the light neutral areas to make your adjustments. This picture, what would I look at in this picture? I think the place to look, and you might notice that you can zoom in while you make these adjustments. I'm kind of looking down here. Like I'm looking at this combination of dog and concrete to get a sense of whether or not the color is right. Oh, she's a little soft, isn't she? Oh boy, that's a bummer. Yeah, there's an example. I just want to go back here for example. 2/50th of a second, but she moved during the exposure. So even though that's the exposure that I like the most, it's a little soft there. There we go. Now the picture is sharp, but the dog isn't. I don't know if I can do that. I don't see any point in editing that photograph now. Let's find something that's sharp. I just want you to see the difference between a sharp picture and a picture that's not. And you might notice, see how it says it's loading? Sometimes it takes a little while for the picture to sort of load up, but that looks much, much, much sharper there, doesn't it? Okay, so zooming back out, we'll edit this one. Back to the develop module. Okay, starting up at the top with temperature. I'm going to go ahead, in this case, I'm just going to warm it up a little bit by bringing that blue over toward yellow. You'll notice this number, by the way, this number is Kelvin degrees, okay? So 5,000, it's kind of 5 to 5,500 is considered the color of daylight. And then the number keeps sort of rising as it gets more yellow and gets really cold down in the 2000s. So again, I'm going to bring it back to the default. I like to use, rather than just using the sliders, I like to use the up and down arrow buttons on my keyboard as a way of kind of getting it in the ballpark in small little increments. Okay, so that looks pretty good. After you adjust the blue, then you go in here and you adjust the green, meaning as you bring the green up and down, you're basically moving toward green or you're moving toward magenta. Again, looking at light neutral areas. Now, exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. These right here are super, super good and super, super important, but I want to make sure that you understand some of these we're not going to touch. Exposure, look up here at the histogram. And I want you to see that this part of the histogram, it's not very bright, but this part that is brighter here in the center, see how it moves around. Actually, I guess that's not bad. As I move the cursor around, it's telling you here on the bottom. Those are the whites, the highlights, exposure, shadows, and blacks. So exposure means you're adjusting the overall mid-tone brightness, okay? How light or how dark that picture is. Now, often, oops, there we go. You want to get that exposure, in the right ballpark to start. Okay, I didn't touch it first. It was already kind of in the right ballpark. Highlights is the light areas, and that's going to help you get detail and tone in brighter areas. Shadows is the dark areas that are not pure black. So note how when I bring those shadows up, look what happens in these areas here. Now, what I will often do is use the highlight slider to make sure that I'm getting proper texture, tone, detail in the highlights in this picture. It's all about these areas up here, okay? Oops. I want you to just notice how bright those highlights are. Now, when the picture gets too bright, they're gone. You know, you lose detail. So I want to get those right, and just sort of in my mind, I anchor based on that. Like, so note, I didn't make very much adjustment to the overall exposure, but I brought the highlights to where they look good. Then I bring the shadows up. I will regularly end up opening my shadows up a little bit to lighten things up, and then going to blacks and bringing the black down a little bit just to make sure that I have maintained a good, rich, solid black. Looks pretty good. I would avoid using the whites slider. It's okay if you actually have areas that are blown out. You don't want to bring it down too much because you're reducing the overall contrast that way and sort of flattening your picture. But in areas where you've got some sort of hot spots, it's okay to bring it down a wee bit if you need to. But try to get away with just using highlights, shadows, and blacks. That way, you don't have to adjust contrast at all. Okay, you are adjusting the contrast in selectively using highlights, shadows, and blacks. Overall, it looks pretty good. I'm just going to lighten that shadow up a little bit more. Hot damn. I feel pretty good about that. Let's see. What else do you want to know? This whole little panel here, frankly, I hate all of them. I will not use any of these because these are overall sort of, so look what happens with texture. I bring the texture up and look how sort of chunky it makes that photo look. What it's doing is it's sharpening, but it's going too far and it's creating a sort of filter look that I'm just not into. So I'm going to bring that back to 0. Clarity is even more extreme when you bring it all the way to the top. Basically, what they're both doing is they're increasing local contrast, okay? The way that things are juxtaposed against one another. So when you bring the clarity up, picture looks kind of super, super sharp because all of this stuff down here, especially in this picture, has a lot of contrast, okay? A lot more contrast just in the dog herself right there. The dehaze is a weird gimmick, whatever. I'm not touching that. Vibrance is a saturation adjustment. As you bring the vibrance up, there's not too much color in this, so as you bring the vibrance up, what it does is it increases the saturation of some of the more dull colors and tries to punch them up. And then saturation overall just brings all the saturation of all the colors up. The reason that I don't touch any of these is because there are better ways to deal with any of that. For example, if you want to deal with saturation, go down below to the HSL, Hue, Saturation, and Luminance. Choose Saturation here, and this is where you can adjust the saturation of your individual colors, okay? Now, there are a lot of things here that I not only didn't show you, but I'm not going to show you. So, for example, tone curve, here's, you know, kind of like using curves. And it's fine if you are comfortable using curves. It's not bad to use it, you know. I don't have a problem with this tool. But basically by separating the highlights, shadows, and blacks especially, you're able to do most everything you want to do right there. Hue, luminance, those I wouldn't get into. hue is when you're adjusting the color of each of the colors. Like when you adjust the red slider, for example, you're changing the color of all the reds in the picture. Split toning is, well, in my mind, it's a gimmick, so I'm not going to touch it. Now, there's detail here. Detail is for sharpening and noise reduction. Not bad. These are not bad tools. The one thing I'd say is just work slowly and methodically, and don't do stuff that you don't need to do. Keep things natural and pure, and let Lightroom sort of help you fix things that need fixing, but don't go too far and start making things too goofy. Lens corrections. Now, I didn't talk about this. I'm sure you can find a billion videos about this kind of stuff. But did you know that you can create a profile? I think Ahi, I remember, mentioned creating a profile where you can set your lens. So you can actually set your lens, your make, model, and create a profile of your lens to sort of correct for your particular lens. You can also, I do end up using these, the defringe adjustment. Let's see, I feel like I'm going to save that, and we'll cover that in a slightly more advanced one, and I'll find an area where we have some defringing to deal with. That's where you have really bright areas and the sort of chromatic aberration that occurs around the edges of bright areas. Let's see, transform. This is where you can adjust things like a vertical shift, for example, when you are photographing things with architectural elements, and a horizontal shift, etc. Basically, those sorts of framing adjustments that you might need to make. Let's see how the grid shows up for all of these. But apart from that, effects, calibration, yeah, I'm not going to touch any of these. The truth is, one of the reasons I don't touch them is because I don't touch them, you know. To keep things as simple as possible. Now, the one other thing I want to point out is that you can create what they call a virtual copy of a photo. So now I put this photo here. I think I put this photo. It's in both, right? No, it is. Okay, so this photo is in both collections. And I just want you to see, I'm working in this collection called Contenders. And I want you to see if I switch to this collection here, you know, the one named Onions, because that makes so much sense. It's still got all the same changes to it, okay? Because again, it's the photo. I've just changed the photo. It's the same photo in the two different collections. If I want to make different versions of that photo, I could also go up to Photo menu, and choose Create Virtual Copy. Now, a virtual copy allows me to make whatever other changes I may want to make. Let's do this. Let's do this sort of extreme thing. Let's see. Okay, so there. All right, so we got the sort of one brighter looking version. Now I think that brighter looking version, maybe it's too bright. Maybe bring those highlights down a little bit more. I keep looking at this over here and thinking maybe it's a little hot. That looks a little better. So two different versions of the same photo. One lighter and brighter, and one a little darker and moodier right here. But I want you to see that those two photos, look, that second one doesn't exist here in this collection. It only exists within this collection, okay? It exists within all of my photographs, meaning when I come, whoops, when I go to the library and go to all photographs, there it is, there's my darker one. But it doesn't exist within this collection. So you get to control your collections, all right? I just thought there at the end, there are a couple things I realized I didn't mention. For example, I didn't mention to crop. Here is your crop adjustment. When you crop on that, some options show up down here. You can maintain the same aspect ratio. It's locked. If you want to undo that aspect ratio, you can undo the lock, and then you can make things as weird shaped as you might want. Reset that. Oops. When I just did the reset settings, I just reset the whole picture to go back to, oops, I meant to reset the crop, not reset the whole thing. Reset brings you back to before you ever screwed the whole picture up in the first place. Angle, this is how you can rotate things that way. You can also rotate things by making your frame a little smaller and then coming off the side and sliding things around that way as well. Okay. Okay, I'm going to reset that. Now some of these others, if you just hold your cursor over, it will tell you you've got spot removal, red eye correction, graduated filter, radial filter, and the adjustment brush. I will come back to those later on, and well, at least some of them. Some of them I never touch. But I'll come back to those later on and talk them through. Okay. So there you go. Now, again, I just want to clarify, those changes are done. You don't have to do anything.